My brother held the keys in his fist like they had always belonged there. That was the part that stayed with me afterward. Not what my parents said, not the way my mother kept her eyes on the table when she slid them across, not my father's voice doing the thing it did when he had decided something was already finished and was now simply informing the room. It was the way Garrett closed his hand around them. Easy, familiar, like catching something that had been thrown to him his whole life. The keys were on a plain ring, two of them, the front door and the deadbolt I had installed myself 3 years ago after the lock mechanism on the original started sticking in cold weather. I had paid a locksmith $40 to cut the spare. The spare had lived on a hook inside my kitchen cabinet ever since, in case of emergencies, in case I locked myself out, in case I needed someone I trusted to get in. My parents had taken it from the cabinet. I do not know when. I found out that evening, sitting at my mother's dining room table with the good placemats out, when my father cleared his throat and said they had been thinking, and that given everything, it made more sense for Garrett to have the house. He said it the way you say a thing you have already decided, not a conversation, a notification. I looked at the keys in Garrett's hand. I did not look at my parents. I did not say anything. My mother finally looked up. She said, "You understand, don't you? You've always been so practical about these things." Practical. The word they used when they meant, we knew you wouldn't make a scene. If you have ever sat at a table while your family handed away something that was yours and been called practical for not stopping them, stay with me. Like this, if you have ever had the thing taken and the composure used as evidence that you didn't mind. I'll be right back with you. I stayed for another 40 minutes. I ate the food. I answered when spoken to. When I left, I hugged my mother at the door the way I always did. In the car, I sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel and the engine off. Then I took my phone out. I had one unread message. It was from my attorney. It said, "Confirmed for delivery tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. I put the phone back in my bag, then I started the car and drove home to my house. The house had been mine for 6 years. Not mine the way children call things theirs, the bedroom, the shelf, the chair nobody else was supposed to sit in. Mine on paper. Mine in the county record. Mine with a deed that had my name printed on it in the particular permanent font of documents that are meant to outlast the people who sign them. I had bought it at 31 with a down payment I had saved over 4 years of doing without things I wanted so I could have the thing I needed. My parents had not contributed to the down payment. This is not a complaint. It is a fact. The kind of fact that becomes relevant only when someone tries to rewrite the history of an object they did not pay for. My mother had opinions about the neighborhood. My father had opinions about the square footage. Garrett had never seen the inside of the house until I invited him to a dinner 2 years after I moved in, at which point he stood in the kitchen and said it was smaller than he remembered, even though he had never been there before. I had done most of the work myself, not the structural things. I knew my limits. But the painting, the fixtures, the slow, patient accumulation of a place that felt like it had been chosen rather than inherited. I had refinished the floors in the second bedroom over a long weekend in October, alone, with the windows open and a radio on the windowsill. And when I was done, I sat on the bare floor and looked at what I had made and felt, for the first time in a long time, like I was somewhere that was actually mine. The mortgage was in my name, 11 years left on a 30-year note. I had never missed a payment, not once. Not the month I lost a contract and had to pay from savings, not the winter the furnace went out and I paid the repair bill and the mortgage payment in the same week and ate simply for the rest of the month and did not tell anyone because there was no one to tell who would have helped rather than offered an opinion. My parents knew the house existed. They did not know what it had cost to keep. That was partly my fault. I had learned early that sharing difficulty with my family produced sympathy in the short term and leverage in the long term. And I had decided the sympathy was not worth the price. So I had been quiet. And my quietness had been read, as it always was, as an absence of need. Garrett had lived in 4 apartments in 6 years. 2 of them had been paid for partially by my parents. Not secretly, openly. The way my family handled money for Garrett, openly, generously, without the kind of accounting they applied to everything else. I did not resent this at the time. I tell it now only because it is the map of how my parents arrived at the decision they made at that dining room table. They had always provided for Garrett. They had always assumed I provided for myself. The difference, in their minds, had never been about fairness. It had been about who needed it. And somehow, over many years, I had convinced them so thoroughly that I did not need anything that they had arrived at the extraordinary conclusion that what was mine was simply available. I need to stop here. Most of what I'm telling you is true. Some details have been adjusted slightly, a timeline compressed, a name changed, because there are people in this story who are still in my life in complicated ways, and I am not interested in burning every bridge when some of them are still being rebuilt. I sometimes use AI to help me hold the sequence together when I tell something out loud that I've spent years carrying in pieces. None of that changes the deed. None of it changes the keys on the ring or the way my brother's hand closed around them. If you have ever been so reliably capable that your family mistook your self-sufficiency for consent, subscribe and stay with me. This part of the story is almost over. The next part is where the paper starts talking. The mortgage company had my name on file. The county assessor's office had my name on file. The homeowner's insurance, the utility accounts, the HOA, such as it was, 3 streets of modest houses with a shared agreement about fence heights and holiday decorations. All of it carried my name. Not my parents' names, not Garrett's. Mine. This matters because when my parents decided to give Garrett the house, they did not consult any of these documents. They consulted their own understanding of how the family worked. And in their understanding, the family worked like this. What belonged to one of them belonged to all of them. And what belonged to all of them was distributed by them, and the distribution was their decision to make. It had always worked that way. Until it didn't. I had known for 3 months that they were planning something. It had started with a conversation my mother had with my aunt that my cousin Carol had mentioned to me at a birthday dinner, offhandedly, the way people mention things they assume you already know. Carol had said, "Your mom was saying Garrett might be moving into your place?" I had kept my face still. I said, "She mentioned it." Carol said, Are you okay with that?" I said, "I'm handling it." She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "You have that look." I said, "What look?" She said, "The one where you've already decided something and you're just waiting for everyone else to catch up." Carol had known me for 30 years. She was not wrong. I had called my attorney the following week. Her name was Patricia, and she had handled my closing 6 years earlier. And when I explained the situation, she was quiet for a moment. And then she said, "They don't have standing to transfer what they don't own." I said, "I know." She said, "But if they try to create a paper trail, a gift letter, a family agreement, anything informal, it can create complications even when the underlying ownership is clear." I said, "What do I do?" She said, "You file first." We had filed a protective order on the property 8 weeks before the dinner at my mother's table. A formal notice in the county record. No transfer of ownership, no liens, no encumbrances without court approval. It did not stop my parents from taking the spare key from my kitchen cabinet. It did not stop my father from making his notification at the dining room table. But it meant that every step they planned to take after that evening would walk directly into something they did not know was there. The court order was scheduled for delivery the following morning. I had known that when I sat down to eat. I had known it when my father cleared his throat. I had known it when I watched Garrett close his hand around the keys. I had not said anything. Not because I was afraid, because I had learned over a long time that the most effective thing you can do when someone is walking confidently toward a wall is simply to make sure the wall is there. Carol called me that night. She said, "I heard what happened at dinner." I said, "I figured you would." She said, "You didn't say anything." I said, "No." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Patricia filed, didn't she?" It wasn't a question. I said, 8 weeks ago. She exhaled. Then she said, very quietly, "Good." If your family ever took something that was legally, formally, documentably yours, drop a word in the comments. One word for what they called it when they did it. I have a feeling I know what that word is. The call came at 9:17 the next morning. My mother. I let it ring twice. Then I answered. She said, "There are people at Garrett's apartment." I said, "I know." She said, "They have paperwork." I said, "I know." She said, "What did you do?" That question, what did you do? As if the filing were the action that required explanation. As if handing my keys to my brother at a dinner table were simply a thing that had happened, a weather event, a fact of nature, and I had done something unusual by responding to it. I said, "I protected my property." My mother's voice changed, not loudly, the way a room changes when a window closes and you realize how much noise had been coming in. She said, "This is family." I said, "The deed doesn't say family. It says my name." She said, "Your father is very upset." I said, "I imagine he is." She said, "Garrett needs somewhere to live." And there it was, the sentence they had built the whole thing around. Garrett needs. As if need were a legal instrument. As if my brother's circumstances were a claim against my property. As if the solution to one child's instability was the annexation of another child's life. I said, "Garrett is 38 years old." She said, "You know how he is." I said, "I do." She said, "We thought you'd understand. You've always been so," I said, "practical." She stopped. I said, "I know." Then I said, "Mom, I have to go. Patricia will be in contact with your attorney this week." She said, "We don't have an attorney." I said, "You'll need one." I ended the call. Then I sat at my kitchen table for a moment. The house was very quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a long period of noise has stopped, when your body hasn't fully registered yet that it's allowed to stop bracing. My father called 20 minutes later. I did not answer. He left a voicemail. His voice was different from my mother's. Where she had gone quiet, he had gone formal. The voice he used when he was very angry, and had decided that the way to express it was precision. He said the filing was an overreaction. He said family matters were handled within the family. He said Garrett was going through a difficult period, and that what I was doing was selfish. He said he expected me to call Patricia and have the order withdrawn before the end of the week. He said, "This is not who we raised you to be." I listened to the voicemail once, then I deleted it. Patricia called at 11. She said, their attorney reached out. I said, they got one fast. She said, retained this morning. He's arguing family intent, that the transfer was a mutual family understanding, and the filing is obstructing a private agreement. I said, is there a document? She said, they're claiming a verbal agreement. I said, there was no verbal agreement. She said, I know. That's why we're going to be fine. But they're going to push for a hearing. I said, let them. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Ellen, just my name. The way people say it when they want to make sure you're actually there and not just performing okay. I said, I'm fine. She said, I know you are. I just want to make sure you know what the next few weeks look like. I said, tell me. She told me. It was not simple, it was not fast, but it was clear. And clarity, I had learned, was the thing my family had always relied on me not to have. The hearing was on a Thursday morning in November. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. I had been in courtrooms before, once for jury duty, once to file a small claims matter years ago. But I had never sat at a table with my name on a placard, while my parents sat at another table 12 feet away. My father wore the suit he kept for funerals. My mother wore the gray dress she considered serious. Garrett was not there. I had wondered if he would be. He wasn't. Patricia told me later he had called her office by mistake, looking for his parents' attorney, and when he realized his error, he had hung up without speaking. I did not know what to make of that. I still don't. The judge was a woman in her 60s, with reading glasses on a chain, and the particular economy of movement that comes from spending years in rooms where people bring her their worst decisions and expect her to sort them out. She read the filing. She read the response. She asked my parents' attorney to summarize the family agreement he was claiming. He spoke for 4 minutes. He used the words long-standing understanding twice. He used family intention 3 times. He did not produce a document because there was no document, because the agreement he was describing had existed only in my parents' interpretation of a family dynamic that had never been written down because it had never been real. The judge looked at him over her glasses. She said, "Is there a written agreement?" He said, "The nature of family arrangements." She said, "Is there a written agreement?" He said, "Not in the traditional sense." She said, "Is there a written agreement? Yes or no?" He said, "No." She looked down at the file. Then she looked at Patricia. She said, "The deed." Patricia slid it across. The judge read it. She said, "And the payment history." Patricia produced 11 years of mortgage statements, every month, my name on every one. The judge looked at them for a moment, not long. She had seen enough documents in her life to read one quickly. Then she said, "The protective order stands. There will be no transfer of this property without the documented, notarized consent of the title holder." She looked at my parents' attorney. "Your clients are advised that any attempt to encumber, transfer, or otherwise alienate this property without that consent will be treated as contempt." My parents' attorney said, "Your Honor, if I may." She said, "You may not." The room was very quiet after that. I looked at the table in front of me, the placard with my name, the mortgage statements in their neat stack, 11 years of payments, every month, without missing one. I thought about the October weekend I had refinished the floors, the radio on the windowsill, the bare wood under my hands, the feeling of sitting in a room I had made and knowing it was mine. My father was looking at me from across the room. I met his eyes once, then I looked away. Not because I was angry, because there was nothing left in that direction that required my attention. Outside in the hallway afterward, my mother tried to speak to me. She said my name. I stopped walking. She said, "We didn't think you'd go this far." I said, "I know." She said, "Your father," I said, "Mom." She stopped. I said, "The deed has my name on it. It has always had my name on it. That was never going to change." She looked at me for a moment. Her eyes were wet. Not crying, just that particular shine that comes before crying when someone is trying not to. She said, "We just wanted to help Garrett." I said, "I know." Then I said the only other thing I had to say. I said, "Help him with something that's yours to give." Then I walked to where Patricia was waiting at the end of the hall, and we left. If your family ever told you that protecting yourself was the same as betraying them, I want to ask you something. Not what you did, what you wish you'd done sooner. Leave it in the comments. I'll be reading. The keys came back on a Friday. Not dramatically. My mother dropped them through the mail slot while I was at work. No note, just the keys on the entry floor when I got home, catching the afternoon light from the window beside the door. I picked them up, stood there for a moment. Then I put them back on the hook inside the kitchen cabinet. Same hook, same cabinet, the place they had always lived. I had thought, before all of this, that I would feel something larger when it was over. Vindication, maybe, or grief. Something with more shape to it than what I actually felt, which was quiet. Just very quiet. The particular quiet of a thing that has been wrong for a long time finally being set back to right. Patricia sent a summary of the court record the following week. 1 page. My name, the property address, the ruling, the date. I printed it. I put it in the drawer with the deed and the closing documents and the first mortgage statement from 6 years ago. The one I had kept because it was the first official proof that the house was mine. The drawer held the whole history now. Everything I had built and paid for and refinished and repaired and kept through the months I did not mention to anyone, because there was no one to tell. My parents called twice in the weeks after the hearing. Once my father, once my mother. I let both go to voicemail. Not because I intended never to speak to them again, because I needed a period of quiet in which the record could settle, in which the facts could stop being contested and simply be true, in which I could walk through my own front door without carrying the weight of what they had tried to do with it. Garrett sent a text in December. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't known about the filing until after. He said he should have said something when they gave him the keys. I read it twice. Then I wrote back, "I know." That was all. It was enough. The house looks the same as it always did. That is the thing nobody tells you about these situations. The aftermath is not dramatic. The floors I refinished are still the same floors. The deadbolt I installed is still the same deadbolt. The hook inside the kitchen cabinet still holds 2 keys on a plain ring. What changed is simpler than that. What changed is that I know, in a way I did not know before, exactly what I am willing to protect. And I know that protecting it is not a betrayal. It is just the truth, finally given the paperwork it always deserved. Thank you for staying with me through this one. If you have ever been so reliably fine that your family mistook your self-sufficiency for permission, I hope you remember this. Capable is not the same as available, and available is not the same as yours to take. Subscribe if you want to stay with stories like this one. Leave a comment if any of this felt familiar. And if there is something with your name on it that someone has been treating as theirs, maybe it is time to find out what Patricia would say.